Joining us now from Tel Aviv is Paul Hirschson. He's the spokesperson for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Paul, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
So what is Israel's military objective here?
We'd like to achieve three things. First of all, we'd like calm and quiet to come back to the civilian population in Israel, for Hamas and others of their ilk to stop indiscriminately firing missiles into our residential neighborhoods. Secondly, we'd like to dismantle the terror machine in Gaza. This is the third time in 6 years this has happened. We're not in the mood for putting a band-aid on it this time, so that in 2 months' time there'll be one a month, and 6 months' time there'll be one missile a week, and then a year and a half from now we'll be back to where we are. And thirdly, we'd like very much for Mahmoud Abbas, President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, to end his pact, his political pact with these killers from Hamas, because progressing negotiations towards a peace treaty is impossible by definition when he is in partnership with people who simply want to kill.
Palestinians say at least 100 people, Paul, including women and children, have been killed. Hundreds more have been hurt. The Palestinian Health Ministry says several people were killed watching the World Cup in Khan Yunis in the south. Are those Hamas targets?
The military, the Israeli military, only targets legitimate military targets. There's very carefully chosen through multiple layers of intelligence, legal advice, a lot of training goes into this, a careful consideration goes into this. In over 1,000 strikes, which is a lot, in the last 4 days, almost 100 people have been killed, including, tragically, civilians. On at least one case, we have clear evidence that Hamas are using civilians, their own civilians, as human shields, a war crime in itself. And there are something in the region approaching 700 people who've been injured. Of the 700 people who've been injured, 160 were hospitalized, and the others were suffering from minor injuries or shock and were treated and discharged home. This is the tragedy. This is the tragedy of where we are now, is that Hamas has forced us all into a situation that we certainly did not want to be in. But it's intolerable to have incessant firing of rockets indiscriminately into civilian populations throughout Israel at this point. It's not something that is acceptable to us, and we need to put a stop to it.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says this is not a war against Hamas. In fact, he says this is against the Palestinian people. What's your response, sir?
Well, let me be clear. The exact opposite is the case. The Palestinian people are not our enemy. We would like nothing more than to get back to the negotiating table. It took us, Israel and the international community, some years to convince the Palestinian Authority to come back to the negotiating table. We were there for almost 9 months, unfortunately didn't resolve all of the issues, and we would like nothing more than to get back there. This is something which is not possible when he is in a political partnership with the spiritual siblings of ISIS, with the ideological siblings of Boko Haram in Nigeria. Look, the people from Hamas sometimes speak sophisticated language, but if you listen to what they say, and even more importantly, you look at what they do, they are one of the darkest schools of thought in modern political history.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas made this comment. He suggested what he believes is the motive for the Israeli airstrikes. Let's listen to that and get your reaction, Paul.
We know that Israel is not defending itself. It is defending settlements, its main project.
Is Israel defending the settlements?
No, I'm not sure what President Abbas is saying. There are no settlements in the Gaza Strip. I remind you that 8 years ago we redeployed out of the Gaza Strip. We withdrew 9,000 Israelis who were living there. We exhumed the bodies of Israelis who had died and been buried close to home in order to leave the Gaza Strip without any sign of Israel, in the hope that they would, I don't know, build Dubai on the Mediterranean coast. Instead, they chose hate. And they built an army, and they built an arsenal of thousands and thousands of missiles, which they're firing right now into residential districts throughout Israel.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel's military is prepared for all possibilities. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean an all-out ground invasion is imminent?
A ground operation is a possibility. I don't think a decision has been taken. What it means is the following. We don't want to put a band-aid onto this problem for a third time. We don't want, as I said already, we don't want a situation whereby for a couple of months there won't be missiles, and then there'll be one a month, and then there'll be one a week, and then in a year and a half we'll be back to where we are now. We want to dismantle the terror machine in Gaza.
Paul, here's a question a lot of people are asking about this conflict. The more rocket attacks Hamas fires, the more airstrikes and bombing Israel conducts. At some point, someone has to blink. How is this conflict going to end?
No, I don't know if that's 100% true, what the way you painted it. You know, in the first 6 months of 2014, 450 missiles and rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip into Israel without our responding whatsoever. It was only in the past 3 weeks where there was a significant uptick in the number of missiles and rockets launched, and then over the course of the last 4 days, where over 500 rockets and missiles have been launched into Israel, that the government very reluctantly, the government made the decision that if they are not willing to take up our offer of quiet will answer quiet, then we will put a stop to it. Look, let's be clear. At the end of the day, we will resolve our differences with the Palestinian people. We will resolve our differences with the entire Arab world for the simple reason that it's in our mutual interest. It's to our mutual benefit. But it's not going to be with a dark school of thought which has elevated and embraced the worship of death. This is who Hamas is. This is who the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is. These are the people who are behaving just like the guys in ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, and just like the guys down in Nigeria and Boko Haram. These are not the people that you or I particularly want to get into bed with.
The Israeli military says most of the rockets fired at Israel were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, and we should also add there have been no fatalities in Israel. How confident is Israel it can continue to stop these rocket attacks?
Well, just to clarify, it's not that most of the rockets have been intercepted. The Iron Dome anti-missile system is calibrated only to intercept those missiles which are headed for urban areas. All of the others we ignore, and we allow them to land in open fields and open areas. So we've intercepted about 10%, but we've intercepted over 95% of those headed for urban areas. It's not for want of trying that Hamas have not yet killed anybody in Israel. There have been people injured. There are people seriously injured. And there are today 3 million people living in 15 seconds distance from a bomb shelter. 3 million out of a population of 8 million. This is no way to live. This is a significant dampening on the passion for life that there is in Israel. So it's not for want of trying that we haven't yet suffered fatalities. It's because we have air raid sirens, it's because we have bomb shelters, we have the anti-missile defense system, and we have a disciplined public who through bitter experience have learned how to behave and function in situations like these.
Paul, are there any plans on the table for any kind of a ceasefire plan? President Obama has reached out to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He has expressed concern about the fighting, has offered U.S. help to broker some kind of deal. Will Israel accept this offer?
Look, for 3 weeks of the escalation, with 250 missiles coming into Israel, we said very clearly, we said repetitively, we said publicly, and we said privately that calm will be answered with calm, quiet will be answered with quiet. This message was rejected out of hand very clearly by Hamas, who chose an escalation. So you know, at this point in time, I don't know whether a ceasefire is on the cards. The ball really is in the hands of Hamas. If they want to stand up and recognize Israel, renounce violence, accept prior agreements, then it's a whole different ballgame. But until such time, our goal at this point is to dismantle the terror machine.
Paul Hirschson, thank you so much, sir.